Hello, my friend. I've put together for you a selection of the most unusual historical photographs you've ever seen. On January 15, 1953, a Pennsylvania Railroad electric locomotive lost control at Washington Union Station and broke through the end of the track, dropping into the concourse below. Engineers later said the station floor stopped it from falling onto the street. Nelson Mandela burns his passbook, the internal travel permit that apartheid South Africa forced non-white people to carry at all times. That small booklet controlled where millions could live and work. Seen in many 1940s and 1950s photos, the cone-shaped bra used spiral stitching and stiff cups to push the chest forward, a look that Hollywood and pin-up magazines spread worldwide. HMS Vidal, a Royal Navy survey ship, climbs a towering ocean swell in 1940, making the ship look like it is balancing on a moving mountain. On January 13, 1915, the Avezzano area in central Italy was shattered by the Marsica earthquake, leaving whole streets flattened into a sea of stone. About 30,000 lives were lost. Numbered defendants sit in the dock at the Neuengamme camp trial in Hamburg in 1946, watched by guards and court officials. The British military court relied on survivor testimony and camp records to trace who ordered what inside that Second World War-era prison camp. In 1968, a United States Army chaplain carries an elderly Vietnamese woman through shattered streets during the Tet Crisis, turning a uniform meant for duty into a lifeline. Wreckage from the Charkhi-Dadri mid-air collision on November 12, 1996, when a Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747 and a Kazakh Ilyushin Il-76 crossed paths above northern India. Investigators said an altitude instruction was misunderstood amid limited English radio calls. Survivors warmed their hands by a small fire beside the smashed concrete of Spytak after the Armenia earthquake on December 7, 1988. The quake killed tens of thousands and left whole towns in ruins. In January 1961, a United States Air Force B-52 broke apart near Goldsboro, North Carolina, and two Mark 39 thermonuclear devices fell into nearby farm fields. Investigators later said several arming steps had already happened. London, autumn 1930. Police swing batons into a crowd as unemployed marchers clash with officers during a tense street protest. The image captures how the Great Depression turned politics into hand-to-hand chaos on ordinary city roads. On a Greenland shoreline in 1943, United States and Danish personnel sort through crates and radio gear abandoned by a German weather outpost after it fled under attack. Those hidden Arctic stations fed the North Atlantic forecast that guided convoys and air raids. On September 30, 1938, European leaders posed moments before signing the Munich Agreement, which handed the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia to Germany without Czechoslovakia at the table. Around 1920, a crowd gathers on a village bridge to stare at a motorcar that has slid into the shallow river, while a horse cart waits like the old world watching the new one fail. Early cars had weak brakes, narrow tires, and almost no safety design. Checkpoint Charlie, Berlin, 1963. The tightest legal crossing between East and West, reserved for foreigners, diplomats, and Allied troops. On May 22, 1963, Austrian Heinz Speit removed his Austin Healey windshield. 9-year-old April balances atop a human pyramid at Muscle Beach in Santa Monica, California, in 1945, as a huge crowd watches the stunt. Muscle Beach became a famous outdoor stage for acrobatics and strength shows. Moscow, August 1991. Trolleybuses block Novinsky Boulevard as citizens build a rolling barricade against the coup plotters. These improvised walls help protect the Russian parliament building. A women's wrestling roster poses in a small ring in 1975, with trophies lined up as proof this was a serious touring business, not a sideshow. At a time when many arenas barely booked women. Hornsey, London, 1943. A woman sorts paper, tins, bottles, and jars into street sacks because wartime rationing turned waste into raw material. These salvage drives fed factories short on imports, so even a child's scrap could end up as new packaging. During construction on London's South Bank in 1910, workers uncovered the ribs of a Roman-era boat buried in Thames mud, its oak frame still holding its shape. Finds like this show the river was a busy supply route nearly 2,000 years ago. New Mexico, 1962. A flying saucer sits in a junkyard between rows of wrecked cars, looking like it landed in the most ordinary place possible. Photos like this were often fiberglass props or roadside stunts built to feed the space-age craze. Charlie Chaplin salutes a packed Wall Street crowd in 1918, standing on a pedestal as victory celebrations erupt after the First World War ended. The little tramp had become a global icon by then. The schooner Mildred lies wrecked off Gurnard's Head, Cornwall, in 1912, its masts still standing while the hull sinks under the weight of its cargo of slag. Shipwreck photos like this were taken fast because tides and storms could erase the evidence within hours. Summer 1945. Hundreds of United States Army jeeps sit abandoned in a massive field dump in liberated Europe, lined up like a motor cemetery. Shipping them home often cost more than they were worth. Valdez, Alaska, 1910. Students and teachers pose on rooflines and dugout snow corridors after storms buried the school in streets. The town sits in a coastal snowbelt where single winters can stack snow higher than buildings. 1955. A woman stands beside a room-sized General Electric mainframe with racks of electronics behind her and long calculations written across a blackboard. Computers like this ran on thousands of vacuum tubes, used punch cards for input. A factory worker pours trinitrotoluene into artillery shells, the kind of mass production that fed the First World War battlefield from far behind the lines. Trinitrotoluene exposure could turn skin and hair yellow and damage the liver. Early 20th century Paris. Dancers at the Moulin Rouge whirl through the can-can while the crowd watches from candlelit tables, turning a nightclub into a city landmark. The venue helped make Montmartre the world's postcard of nightlife, where new music, fashion. In 1941, a Luftwaffe non-commissioned officer points to the victory marks painted on a Junkers Ju 88, shaped like British ships with tonnage numbers beside them. Crews used these tallies as proof of claimed results and as morale fuel. Barents Sea, 1942. A German Ju 88 photographs a transport from Arctic convoy PQ-17, listing and showing smoke as it goes down in the icy water. After the convoy scattered, isolated ships were picked off one by one. Fidel Castro cuts sugarcane in Cuba on July 16, 1969, posing with a machete during a national push to boost the harvest. Sugar was the island's main export, so leaders used public fieldwork like this as propaganda to drive the 10 million-ton goal. New York City, July 1912. People crowd a street hydrant as water spills into the gutter, turning a curb into a public cooling station. Before home air conditioning, hydrants and sidewalk shade were the fastest relief. January 1, 1923. A car rolls through an American city with a banner reading, "I am no camel, I want beer," mocking prohibition and the 18th Amendment. The dry ban had already pushed drinking into illegal bars and smuggling. Berlin, 1937. Germany's leader tours the International Automobile Ausstellung, posing beside a new two-wheeler as cameras and officials crowd in. The Berlin Motor Show began in 1897, ran until 1939. Munich, 1946. A released German soldier sleeps in the rubble where his apartment building once stood, inside the United States occupation zone. For many returnees, home was just broken stone and an address that no longer existed. Post-war Warsaw is a flat sea of rubble, with one lone figure on a roof, looking over a city that was left almost erased after the Second World War. Within a few years, teams cleared millions of bricks and rebuilt whole districts. Project Chagin, 1965. The Soviet Union used a large underground atomic test to carve a crater that filled with water and became Lake Chagin in Kazakhstan. It was sold as peaceful engineering for reservoirs and canals. In rural Scotland, two school children ride a hand-operated pulley line across a river, a shortcut that avoided a 5-mile walk to the nearest bridge. The backpacks and harness-like seats show it was a daily commute hack, not a playground ride. The Russian battleship Oriel, after the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, its hull torn by dozens of hits but still afloat. Captured, repaired, and modernized, it entered the Imperial Japanese Navy as Iwami, turning a near wreck into a trophy warship. The caption says this is a famous American singer in Memphis on July 23, 1973, posing in a karate uniform with a black belt. He began karate training in 1958 and used it heavily in his stage movement. 1910. A market hunter lies low in a flat punt boat beside a boat-mounted punt gun, a giant bore shotgun aimed from the waterline so recoil would push the boat back. These weapons could fire a heavy cloud of shot to take many birds at once. A 1971 miss from the United States Space Agency poses on the scorched Apollo 8 command module, its hatch open to show the cramped hardware inside. Apollo 8 was the first crewed mission to orbit the moon in 1968. A woman rides an early Harley-Davidson-style motorcycle in the 1920s, when big V-twin machines were still close cousins of bicycles with engines. In that era, motorcycles were cheap, fast transport. Madrid, Spain, 1927. Contestants line up for a most beautiful hair contest, showing off waist-length waves that were a status symbol in the pre-salon era. The photo captures a moment when long natural hair was judged like a trophy. Paris, August 26, 1944. A French woman jabs a fallen portrait of Germany's wartime leader beside a United States Army Willys Jeep as the city celebrates liberation. 1930. A traveling circus troupe poses with a camel and a human pyramid in a bare yard, showing how entertainment moved town to town with whatever animals and props fit the wagon. These small circuses were survival businesses during hard times. Munich, 1933. A notice in a shop window says the Bavarian political police closed the store for raising prices, and the owner was sent to the Dachau camp. French soldiers launch a camera kite in 1914 to 1915, lifting a timed shutter over enemy lines for aerial photos before planes were reliable. This simple rig turned wind into a spy tool, capturing trenches from above with no engine and no pilot. New York City, 1917. A recruitment wagon rolls past crowds, pulled by a line-drive tractor with huge steel wheels, while a speaker calls for United States Army volunteers. Parades like this used new machines as moving billboards. Iwo Jima, February 1945. Damaged United States landing vehicles and tanks litter the beach, while Mount Suribachi, an extinct volcano, looms in the mist behind them. The black volcanic sand made digging cover painfully slow. Hungnam, Korea, December 24, 1950. A United States Navy ship passes as demolition charges rip through the port after the United Nations withdrawal. The blasts erased fuel, rails, and docks to deny them to the advancing forces. A man in a bowler hat stands alone on Ledbetter Beach in Santa Barbara on November 2, 1931, during a Southern California visit while working at the California Institute of Technology. Havana, 1976. Two Soviet radio operators pose with Cuban schoolgirls outside a large school building, a casual snapshot of the Cold War alliance on the street level. The Soviet Union trained and equipped Cuban forces and built communication networks. Japan, around 1890. An older man in traditional kimono stands beside a younger man in Western-style dress, staged like a before and after of a country changing fast. The Meiji era pushed uniforms, schools, and modern industry. Calabar, Queensland, 1954. Switchboard operators plug cords into a manual exchange, wearing headsets while a wall clock tracks every minute of calls. Before direct dialing spread, every connection depended on fast hands and memory. Warsaw, July 22, 1966. A Polish People's Army transporter launcher carries an SS-1B Skuta-type tactical missile past Parade Square during the Millennium Parade. The R-11 family was one of the first mass-produced Soviet ballistic missile systems. Around 1948, Israeli soldiers ride a French Renault R-35, a slow pre-war infantry tank that found a second life in the First Arab-Israeli War with the 8th Armored Brigade. The R-35 had thick armor for its day, but a small gun and low speed. Delhi Durbar, December 1911. The Nizam of Hyderabad bows before King George V and Queen Mary on a raised throne under a canopy of imperial symbols. 1916. Winston Churchill, aged 41, sits in uniform with officers of the 6th Royal Scots Fusiliers after leaving the government and taking a frontline command in France. The move was a rare political comeback attempt made in mud and trench routine. 1918 on the Salonika front. Serbian soldiers rest in a shallow trench after an offensive, rifles and helmets stacked against a wall. The Macedonian breakthrough that year forced Bulgaria out of the war, opening a fast route north. Marilyn Monroe and baseball star Joe DiMaggio leave San Francisco City Hall after marrying on January 14, 1954, surrounded by handlers and cameras. The marriage lasted only 9 months, a pressure cooker mix of celebrity crowds. A Churchill Havre, the Royal Engineers assault tank used to smash beach obstacles, was recovered at Juno Beach in 1976 after vanishing there on D-Day. It had slipped into a blast crater on an exit route and was buried for decades. Cleveland, 1958. Browns players Dick Duchesne and Ken Cons huddle over a Coca-Cola bucket filled with charcoal to warm their hands during an icy National Football League game. Before modern heated benches and sideline tech, Kola Peninsula, 1941 to 1942. A German mountain infantryman stands with 2 Soviet prisoners of war, all wrapped in heavy winter gear in the Arctic cold. This front was fought for ports and supply routes above the Arctic Circle. Smolensk, 1941. A knocked-out Soviet tank is turned into a giant road sign, with direction boards nailed to its hull like a dark joke. It shows how fast the front moved that summer, when even wrecks became landmarks for columns trying to find bridges and supply routes. Summer 1941. German and Romanian officers watch troops throw together a bridge across a river, a race to keep tanks and trucks moving east. On this front, engineers and timber often mattered as much as bullets. Ukraine, July, 1941. German soldiers walk past rail flat cars loaded with captured Soviet KV-1 and the huge turret KV-2, hauled away like moving trophies. Early KV tanks had armor that shocked attackers in 1941. Kokand, 1923. Saidiniso Shakirova poses on a new tractor as one of the first women to drive one, surrounded by factory workers and curious onlookers. In later prints, several men's faces were deliberately painted over. Nairobi, around 1960. Daphne Sheldrick sips tea beside a rescued baby elephant at the orphan sanctuary she built in Karen, Kenya. She later became famous for hand-raising orphaned elephants with a milk formula and round-the-clock care. Mid-19th century Italy. A cobbler and his apprentice son smile from a tiny workshop surrounded by scraps, lasts, and finished boots on the floor. Before factory shoes took over, skills like cutting leather and hand-stitching soles were passed parent to child. A returning uniformed father lifts and kisses the baby he has never met, his travel pack and long gear still strapped to his back. In the Second World War, long deployments meant many children first recognized a parent from a photo. Off Cornwall in the early 20th century, a fisherman in a sou'wester hat and oilskin coat rose through Atlantic swell, trusting wool mitts and muscle instead of any engine. London, around 1910. 2 helmeted police officers hold a suffragette on a park bench as she is taken into custody for demanding votes for women. East London, England, 1911. A nursery room is packed with babies laid in large wicker baskets and tight rows of cots while uniformed nurses feed and watch them. Magnitogorsk, Russia, 1979. The rear front memorial shows a steelworker handing a giant sword to a soldier, linking the factory to the battlefield. It is the first piece of a Second World War monument triptych that continues at Volgograd's The Motherland Calls. Berlin, 1927. A barbershop sign offers discounted cuts for the unemployed. Haircut 40 Pfennig, shave 15 Pfennig, showing how common joblessness was. Howard Hughes sits in the cockpit of the Hughes H-4 Hercules, a giant wooden flying boat later nicknamed the Spruce Goose, with 8 engines and a 320-foot wingspan. It flew only once, on November 2, 1947. A small border checkpoint straddles the United States-Mexico line, with a big Mexico banner over the road, and a customs booth stopping early cars and trucks. In the late 1920s, this crossing was already built for vehicle traffic. Hiroshima, 1965. A rebuilt downtown spreads along a river and bridge, with modern concrete blocks rising behind dense rows of low wooden shops. Cars and utility lines crowd the streets, showing how fast the city's core was repopulated. Argentine police and soldiers aim rifles from behind a car during the La Tablada barracks takeover in Argentina, 1989. The attack was led by Movimiento Todos por la Patria, and later investigations. United States Army soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division stand outside a Little Rock, Arkansas high school during court-ordered racial integration in 1957. A mob uses a battering ram to force the door of a county jail in California, 1933, after a high-profile child abduction case. The governor publicly praised the crowd afterward, turning the incident into a national debate about justice and the rule of law. This photo shows the damaged United States Navy signal ship USS Liberty after the June 8, 1967 incident in the Mediterranean during the Six-Day War. Essex and Indianapolis sail near Japan on March 19, 1945. Indianapolis shoots down a Japanese Zero and it splashes into the sea in front of Essex. In World War I Britain, women produced around 80% of the guns and munitions used in the war. Workers who handled certain chemicals were nicknamed canaries because the chemicals tinted their skin a canary-like color. British soldiers escort the captured crew of a German Heinkel, He-111 bomber, after they came down by parachute near Goodwood, Sussex, England, on September 12, 1940. An Eritrean man sits barefoot on a bomb casing after the Red Sea port of Massawa was hit in 1990. The metal shell is longer than his body, showing how close the impact landed. In 1927, a Belgian youth delegation poses inside the Ipatiev House, later known as the place where Russia's last imperial family died, in 1918. After 1921, the building shifted from Army offices to a student dorm. Boeing B-17, Flying Fortress bomber. American Beauty, photographed around 1945, carries nose art and long rows of mission marks on its fuselage. Each small bomb icon equals one combat mission, a built-in scoreboard of how many times this plane returned. These giant team helmet carts were lined up for Super Bowl VII in Los Angeles on January 14, 1973. They were used to haul each team's gear and made the pre-game field look like a moving helmet parade. United Nations airborne troops and heavy supply bundles dropped by parachute over Korea in 1951, filling the sky with canopies at once. This kind of mass airdrop could deliver men, vehicles, and food behind the front in minutes. In July 20, 1933, the Vatican and Germany signed the Reichskonkordat, a treaty that set rules for the Catholic Church inside Germany. The Vatican's main negotiator was Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, later Pope Pius XII. On January 15, 1919, a massive molasses storage tank in Boston, Massachusetts, ruptured and sent a thick wave through the north end. The surge reached about 35 miles per hour, smashed buildings and rail structures. During the Crimean War in 1856, the French warship La Meurtrière became trapped as ice formed around it near Kilburn. The winter of 1855 to 1856 was so cold that temperatures fell to about minus 25 degrees Celsius. In 1942, during the siege of Leningrad, Vsevolozh trainees practiced throwing training devices from a trench in Smolny Park. The small Soviet light tank ahead is used as a drill target, showing how the city trained even under constant pressure. A United States B-24 Liberator heavy bomber flies over Germany during the 1940s, photographed from above with its 4 engines and twin tail clearly visible. The burst below is anti-aircraft fire near the target area. At the Izhora Works in Kolpino, workers armor vehicles for the Russian Empire during 1914 to 1917. The shop floor shows early armored cars with riveted plates being fitted like metal suits before they went to the front. In Glastonbury, Connecticut in 1949, state police used radar to measure car speed on the road, marked here as a radar speed control zone. Connecticut began testing the device in 1947. Chinese soldiers move across snow during the 1969 border clash near Damansky Island on the Ussuri River between China and the Soviet Union. The fight over this tiny river island became one of the tensest moments of the Cold War on the Sino-Soviet border. French battleship Jean Bart sits wrecked in Casablanca after United States Navy shelling on November 16, 1942. The torn deck and twisted steel show how close the hits landed on a ship that still had its main guns. Spain, 1949. A bullfighting trainee practices footwork, while a partner charges a wheeled frame shaped like a bull. This cheap training rig lets them rehearse timing and distance without using a live animal. German East Africa, 1900s. A crowd gathers by the river beside a hippopotamus killed by hunters. The huge body on the bank shows how dangerous and prized this animal was in colonial-era trophy hunts. In 1945, German Sturmgeschütz 3 assault guns were sunk in an Austrian lake to keep them from being captured. Their boxy hulls still sit just under the calm surface, turning the shoreline into a silent scrapyard. This is the armored capsule of the Soviet ZIS-115 government car after test firing in the 1940s, marked top secret. The separate armored shell was hidden inside a normal-looking ZIS-110 body. Red Army soldiers examine one of the first Soviet-built tractors in 1929 in the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. The machine symbolized the first 5-year plan pushed to replace horses with engines and mechanize farms. A captured prototype Nakajima Kika jet sits at the United States Navy Test Base in Patuxent River, Maryland in 1946. Built late in World War II as Japan's first jet project, it was shipped to the United States for evaluation and reverse study. In Hastings, England, on December 12, 1940, people left without homes sleep in seaside caves turned into night shelters. Some families hauled in their own beds and tables, turning bare rock into a temporary home underground. Poland, 1930. Girls at a Catholic women's camp stand in formation outside a wooden hall, while a nun leads the group routine. The lineup, uniform dresses, and flagpole scene show how camps mixed summer life with strict discipline. An early 1900s stunt rider launches a bicycle across a gap high above an oncoming steam locomotive. One bad angle means the wheels meet iron and smoke instead of the landing ramp. Teen fans scream and clutch their faces while watching Elvis Presley perform live in the 1950s. The photo captures the birth of modern pop fandom, where a singer's moves could turn a whole theater into one loud wave. Adolf Hitler speaks from a raised platform to a mass crowd at a German party rally in the 1930s, with swastika banners filling the front rows. The stage scale and uniform flags were designed to make one man look unstoppable to everyone watching. At Farnborough on September 7, 1959, a hovercraft carries a group of Royal Marines during a demonstration run. The craft rides on a cushion of air, letting it skim over flat ground as if it is floating. Before the Normandy landings in 1944, Allied paratroopers pose beside their aircraft with a chalk message aimed at Germany. "The Channel stopped you, but not us." These quick chalk slogans were a morale ritual, written minutes before takeoff into occupied France. While you're looking at these photos, write in the comments which one you liked the most and why. I'll be happy to answer. In France in 1945, German prisoners of war stand inside circular punishment cells made from stacked corrugated metal rings. The open-top pits and numbered circles show a detention method designed to isolate men in plain sight with almost no shelter. Amsterdam, July 1942. German occupation authorities order residents to hand over their dogs, and people arrive with pets for collection at the Olympic Stadium. Many of these dogs were taken for German military use, including mine detection work. Helsinki, November 30th, 1939. An air raid leaves a collapsed building burning behind a wrecked car in the street. This was the opening day of the Winter War, when Soviet bombs hit the Finnish capital. In 1941, Serb civilians were rounded up inside the church in Glina by Ustasha authorities, told it was for forced conversion to Catholicism. Many of the people gathered there were later killed, making this place a chilling symbol of what followed. On April 7, 1990, the ferry Scandinavian Star burns at sea, turning the night into a wall of smoke and light. In just 45 minutes, 158 people died, and the disaster forced major changes in passenger ship safety rules. In Poltava, Ukraine, in 1944, Soviet and American servicemen play volleyball together at an airbase. It is a rare, everyday moment from the Allied partnership around the shuttle bombing raids that operated from Ukrainian fields. Saigon, April 29, 1975. Crowds climb the wall into the United States Embassy as the city is about to fall. The barbed wire and armed guard capture the final hours before the last American evacuations. Hamburg, 1943. A mass memorial ceremony is held for victims of the British air raids, with soldiers and civilians packed into the city square. The scale of the crowd shows how the attacks hit entire neighborhoods at once. Elstree Studios, London, 1954. Crews film Moby Dick beside a gigantic mechanical whale, head hanging from studio cranes. The tiny boat and the huge set piece show how ocean scenes were built indoors with pure engineering. In this gym photo, Arnold Schwarzenegger laughs while three friends pile onto his back like a human weight stack. It is a playful proof of his early training-era strength, turning a workout room into a stunt. Finland, autumn 1939. Civilians dig zigzag trenches in a city park as shelters against Soviet air raids. The fresh earth and stacked paving stones show how fast public spaces were turned into emergency defense lines. Northrop's Hawthorne, California plant in 1949 is packed with flying wing aircraft lined up like giant boomerangs on the ramp. This is the era of Northrop's experimental all-wing bombers, where the factory parking lot and the flight line grew side by side in the early Cold War. France, August 1944. United States soldiers ride a captured German SED KFFC. 2 Kettenkrad, a half-track motorcycle built for towing and hauling. Its front bike wheel and rear tracks let it crawl through mud like a tiny tractor. On the Bryansk front in 1942 to 1943, Soviet combat engineers under Junior Lieutenant V. Polivoda repair a destroyed bridge while shells burst nearby. The timbers in their hands are the supply line itself, because one finished span could move an entire army forward. Moscow, March 9, 1953. An immense crowd fills the streets on the day of Joseph Stalin's funeral, holding portraits and banners. The packed square shows how the Soviet state turned mourning into a mass, tightly organized spectacle. A 1984 Reagan campaign leaflet shows a Russian and English phrase card, joking that Americans might need it if Walter Mondale won and the United States turned communist. The phrases mock Soviet-style life with lines about ration cards, youth groups. A towering dust and smoke column rises over the Nevada test site during a Cold War test in 1970. It is one of several tests that year, and the cloud's mushroom shape comes from hot gases punching upward and pulling debris into a rising stem. August 1939. Adolf Hitler appears in a white uniform while meeting Italian officials surrounded by Nazi officers. The photo was taken days before Germany invaded Poland, at the peak of Axis showmanship. Wardenclyffe Tower was built in 1901 on Long Island as Nikola Tesla's bold attempt at long-distance wireless communication and power transmission. The huge wooden lattice and capped top were meant to launch signals across the Atlantic. Soviet engineers prepare a Venera-class automatic station for a Venus mission in 1967 with a pressure-sealed capsule and a wide dish antenna. These early probes brought back the first direct measurements from Venus's atmosphere during descent. Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini walk past the ruined Garrison Club at the Brest Fortress on August 26, 1941. The visit came weeks after the start of the Germany-Soviet War, using the shattered building as a staged backdrop. St. Petersburg, October 18, 1967. Floodwater pours over the embankment while people watch from the soaked sidewalk. The water peaked at about 244 centimeters, enough to turn the city center into a fast-moving channel. Washington, United States, May 22, 1972. Young men destroy their draft notices during an anti-war rally. This was one of the most visible protest acts of the Vietnam era, turning a piece of paper into a public challenge to the state. Inside the spirit of St. Louis, Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic alone in 1927 with no front windshield at all. A periscope and side windows replaced it, giving him a clearer nose for fuel and better forward view through a tiny tube. During World War I, Russian soldiers stage an improvised camp show during a lull, wearing handmade costumes and masks, including a rabbit suit. These trench performances were a survival tool for morale, turning a frozen front line into a weird little theater for one night. After a live show, Kurt Cobain breaks down backstage, and photographer Ian Tilton captures the moment right as the adrenaline drops. Tilton said the tears came after Cobain wrecked his guitar on stage and then let the camera stay for a rare, unfiltered second. 18-year-old Lieutenant Horatio Lewis of the 145th Pennsylvania Infantry poses in uniform during the American Civil War. He was wounded in both legs at Gettysburg on July 2, 1863. Around 1945 in Ramatelle, Italy, Tuskegee Airman First Lieutenant Ralph L. Turner poses with his crew chief beside his P-51 Mustang fighter. The photo captures how these ground crews kept the aircraft flying mission after mission. Edgar Allan Poe, photographed in 1849, became a legend after he vanished for a week and then turned up in Baltimore wearing clothes that were not his. He was found confused and never explained what happened. A girl practices ballet in the street on a rainy day in Balsall Heath, Birmingham, in 1968. She holds an arabesque pose on wet paving stones, turning an ordinary neighborhood into her own stage. In 1919 in Pall Mall, Tennessee, World War I, Hero Sergeant Alvin C. York returns home and is greeted by his mother at their gate. York became famous after capturing a large group of German soldiers in 1918. Archduke Franz Ferdinand inspects Austro-Hungarian troops during maneuvers near Sarajevo on June 27, 1914. The next day, he was killed in the city, a single event that helped trigger World War I. Excavators in Siberia pose beside a newly unearthed woolly mammoth skull, still packed with soil from permanently frozen ground. Finds like this let scientists read Ice Age life from teeth wear and bone growth, like a time capsule pulled from the earth. Hiroshima, 1946. A packed crowd squeezes onto a streetcar, with tracks still cutting through a scarred city. The tram system was one of the first services restored, and every ride signaled that daily routines were returning. St. Petersburg, October 26, 1911. Crowds pack the new Emperor Peter the Great Bridge on opening day, standing beneath its huge steel arches. At a British horse racing event in the 1980s, Diana Spencer and Camilla Parker Bowles are caught in the same frame among the crowd. The photo freezes a quiet moment before their names became tied to one of the most watched royal triangles of the century. Paris, January, 1910. The Seine. Overflow turns a city street into a canal, and boats drift past shopfronts and doorways. Despite huge property damage, official reports recorded no direct deaths from the flood. Nikita Khrushchev and his wife Nina stand on the Empire State Building observation deck in New York City during his United States visit in September 1959. Amin al-Husseini walks between two ranks of uniformed soldiers while raising his right arm in a Nazi salute. The men lining the path are members of a Bosnian Muslim unit serving under German command during World War II. Argentine President Marcelo Torquato de Alvear stands in a swimsuit and striped robe at Mar del Plata in February 1927, talking to a formally dressed aide on the sand. A sitting head of state posing like this was rare at the time. King Abdulaziz ibn Saud rides in traditional Arabian dress, holding the reins, with another rider partly visible beside him. The photo is dated 1923 and is commonly captioned as taken during his campaign to unify Arabia. Several men in military-style uniforms sit around a table inside a railway dining car, talking closely while others stand behind them. The attached caption claims it was taken in Finland during World War II at a 75th birthday visit involving top wartime leaders. A damaged section of a United States Navy ship is shown with scorched railings, torn plating, and smoke drifting over rough water. The caption matches the June 8, 1967 attack off the Sinai coast during the Six-Day War. A young Princess Elizabeth sits beside United States President Harry S. Truman in the back seat of a convertible car during her visit to the United States in 1951. She wears a tailored suit and hat, while Truman wears a dark suit. A young man identified as Franklin D. Roosevelt sits at the helm of a small boat beside his mother Sarah in 1904. The photo shows the steering wheel and deck gear in the foreground, with open water behind them. A long wooden coat rack crammed with fur coats and stiff top hats is shown in a Moscow residence said to belong to United States envoy William Bullitt in 1934. The mix of diplomatic formal wear and heavy winter gear on the same hooks hints at a world where a single doorway separated lavish receptions from brutal cold. An elderly woman in a work cap uses an air rivet gun on a metal aircraft panel at a Bell Aircraft factory in Atlanta in 1943. The tight line of fresh rivets and her steady grip show how even older civilians were pulled into building military airplanes during World War II. Two people sit in a studio wearing oversized protective goggles and respirator-style masks while working with hazardous paints in Czechoslovakia in 1929. The photo highlights early chemical safety gear used by artists to reduce exposure to paint fumes and dust. Napoleon I's bronze figure lies toppled on the cobblestones of Place Vendôme in Paris after the Vendôme column was pulled down during the Paris Commune in 1971. The ghostly blur of the crowd behind it comes from a long exposure. The Zeppelin LZ-11, Victoria Luise, glides above a line of racing sailboats during a regatta off Kiel, Germany in 1912. The airship was one of the early passenger Zeppelins, turning a sea race into a floating advertisement for the new age of flight. A U.S. Army M4 Sherman crew from the 2nd Armored Division applies a layer of concrete to the tank's front hull, trying to blunt hits from late-war German anti-tank guns, March 19, 1945. This close-up shows a black bear test subject nicknamed Yogi sitting behind metal bars during United States high-speed escape capsule experiments in 1962. On March 21, 1962, Yogi was ejected from an aircraft at about 1,400 kilometers per hour. In 1912, in Nový Jáchymov, Czechia, satirist Jaroslav Hasek and a friend jumped into the Vltava River wearing matching swimsuits. The man who later wrote The Good Soldier Sveik loved public pranks like this. Paris, 1940s. A bundled-up woman shares her last scraps with a street cat beside a handcart marked Vaucanson. In a city where food was counted and winters cut deep, this tiny feeding became a quiet act of survival for two. Japanese women and teenagers bow as special attack pilots ride a truck toward an airfield in the Japanese Empire, 1945. The goggles and calm salutes look like a routine send-off, but everyone there knew this was a one-way farewell. Spring 1945 in Berlin. Soviet signal troops run a field radio from the curb, turning a shattered street into a working command line. Behind them, the wall slogan, "Berlin bleibt Deutsch," hangs like a dare, already being drowned out by new voices on the wire. Washington, 1971. A Vietnam War veteran hurls his decorated uniform toward a barricade in front of the United States Capitol during an anti-war protest. The medals are meant to prove honor, but in this moment, they become evidence that the war had already taken something back. On a silent film set in the 19-teens, Charlie Chaplin and Stan Laurel lean toward a bulky hand-cranked camera while cinematographer Roland Totherow listens. That simple box of gears and glass helped shape modern screen comedy. London, January 30, 1969. The Beatles played their final live public set on the roof of Apple Corps headquarters, turning a cold lunchtime into history. The 42-minute performance was filmed for the film Let It Be. In 1915, over Lille in occupied France, a British pilot dropped a football onto German lines, and soldiers scattered because it looked like a deadly device. An hour later, they found the words 1st of April on it, a sky prank caught on film in the middle of World War I. This 1969 FBI poster hunts escaped federal prisoner Benjamin Hoskins Paddock, listing a long chain of aliases like Chrome Dome and Old Baldy beside 10 fingerprint blocks. Costa Rica, 1960. Workers stand beside the Dickey stone spheres, some so perfectly round and so heavy they can reach about 16 tons. No one knows their exact purpose, so each sphere feels like a carved message that lost its key centuries ago. On May 29, 1937, the German pocket battleship Deutschland was hit during the Spanish Civil War, and this photo freezes the smoke column, rising like a black signal over calm water. Berlin, September, 1945. Children in the British sector line up in a schoolyard in Charlottenburg as a woman pours soup from a kettle into their bowls. The long queue and the thin shoes tell the real story of the first post-war winter. Around 1850 in California's Sacramento Valley, a lone prospector pans the American River, betting his day on a few bright flakes. The California gold rush pulled about 300,000 people west, and that human flood reshaped San Francisco, rail routes. Polish newspaper photo from 1928. A camel caravan shares the desert with a specially built tourist car fitted with tracks and oversized tires for sand. It is a snapshot of the moment machines began trying to outrun the old trade routes. Istanbul, 1920. A Russian immigrant jazz band plays with saxophone and megaphone-style singer, likely inside the Para Palace Hotel, where new sounds drew packed rooms. After the Russian Civil War, approximately 150,000 refugees reached Turkey. Wiesenbach, Baden, January 18, 1942. A sentry stands in -25 degrees, his scarf turned into a crusted ice mask under a steel helmet. The frozen fabric is not snow, it is his own breath made solid. Chinese Border Patrol troops wade along the river near Zhenbao Island, called Damansky in Russian sources, during the tense border standoff of 1969. The tiny island on the Ussuri River became a global headline because both sides claimed it as theirs. Warsaw, 1944. A home army fighter holds the underground-made Błyskawica submachine gun while the wall behind her carries the insurgent bulletin Warsawa Walczy, meaning Warsaw Fights. The weapon and the newspaper were both built in secret. Stalag 344, 1942. British prisoners of war stage a camp show wearing improvised costumes and makeup on a handmade set. The smiles look like a party, but it is really survival theater, a way to steal back one evening from captivity. A young woman in a satin dress smiles while officers escort her through a crowded hallway, a strange calm amid tight security. The picture is remembered because she reversed her court cooperation to return to a notorious group. At Spahn Ranch outside Los Angeles in 1969, a group of young followers relaxes on hay bales while horses graze behind them. The ranch was an old Western movie set, and this peaceful photo later became linked to a high-profile American court case. April 19, 1995. MacArthur Wheeler walked into two Pittsburgh banks, believing lemon juice on his face would hide him from security cameras like invisible ink on paper. A plane lies torn open in the snow on Rikers Island in 1957, with men in coats watching under hard lights. The caption says 57 prisoners ran out to pull survivors from the wreck, and many later got shorter sentences for helping. This cabinet card names 5-year-old Fanny Virginia Cassiopeia Lawrence and was filed in New York in 1863 under an act of Congress, turning one child's portrait into an official record. Abraham Lincoln sits with his youngest son Tad leaning on the table, a quiet family pose inside the White House in early 1865. Just weeks later, Lincoln was killed, making this one of the last photographs of him alive with a child at his side. Nigerian troops move into Port Harcourt in 1968 during the Biafran War, passing a roadside sign that still shouts Biafra's message about freedom and aggression. The photo catches the exact moment a city changes hands when slogans on boards lose to rifles on the road. Ridley Road, London, 1962. Oswald Mosley is caught mid-swing as a protester's fist snaps his head back while men around them grab sleeves and shoulders to control the chaos. The rally collapsed almost immediately under pressure from locals. New York City, New Year's Eve, 1943. Ouija catches Shorty, the Bowery cherub, posing on a bar rail at Sammy's Bar, mug in hand, while regulars stare like it is a street show indoors. The photo is pure Ouija, one flash, 1 second, and a whole corner of wartime nightlife frozen in place. Soviet Union, 1980s. Someone in a long line writes a number on their wrist so they can step away and still keep their place. It is a tiny trick that shows how waiting became a daily system, with ink replacing trust. Tehran, March 8, 1979. Thousands of Iranian women pack the street under umbrellas and falling snow, chanting and raising fists in a rare, unified wave. They were protesting the new compulsory head covering rule. This portrait shows Buffalo Calf Road woman of the Northern Cheyenne, wrapped in a patterned shawl with braided hair and bead jewelry. Cheyenne tradition remembers her for riding back under fire to save her wounded brother during the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. A group of Slovenian conscripts in German uniform poses in deep mountain snow during World War II, clustered around a wooden marker with jagged peaks behind them. The photo hints at a brutal truth of the era. Many men from occupied regions were pulled into armies not fully of their choosing. Cleveland Stadium, 1963. Jim Brown, number 32, walks the sideline wrapped in a heavy coat with his helmet in hand, legs still marked by the game. That season he ran for 1,863 yards. June 9, 1939. Franklin Roosevelt stands with King George VI and Queen Elizabeth during the first visit of a reigning British monarch to the United States. The smiles look formal, but the timing was a warning flare. The USS Arizona lists hard in the water at Pearl Harbor as thick smoke rolls across the harbor after the attack on December 7, 1941. The ship became the attack's darkest symbol, with more than 1,100 sailors and Marines lost aboard. So my favorite collection of historical photographs has come to an end. If you also have your favorite shots, write in the comments which ones and why. I will be happy to read and answer.